Blood stained the Arizona dust as the lone Apache warrior stood between Sarah's children and certain death, his forbidden act of mercy sealing their fates together against the wishes of two hostile worlds. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The sun hung like a cruel sentinel over the parched Arizona territory, its merciless rays beating down upon the modest cabin that Sarah Colton and her children called home. 3 months had passed since they'd laid John in the hard, unforgiving earth, taken by the fever that had swept through the settlement like a vengeful ghost. 3 months of Sarah waking before dawn, her hands raw and blistered from work that had once been her husband's, her mind numb with exhaustion and grief. She paused in the doorway, wiping sweat from her brow with a threadbare sleeve, her honey-brown hair escaping from the tight bun at the nape of her neck. At 35, Sarah's face had begun to show the fine lines of a life lived under the harsh western sun, but her eyes remained clear and determined, blue as the summer sky and just as vast in their capacity for both storm and serenity. "Thomas!" she called, shielding her eyes against the glare. Have you finished with the chickens?" Her son appeared from around the corner of the small barn, his 10-year-old frame already showing the lankiness that had been his father's. "Yes, Mom," he answered, his voice carrying the weight of responsibilities too heavy for his young shoulders. "Emma's gathering the eggs now." Sarah nodded, a small smile softening her features. Thomas had grown so much these past months, not just in height but in spirit. He'd taken to his father's chores with a determination that both broke her heart and filled it with fierce pride. "Mama." 8-year-old Emma's excited voice pierced the afternoon stillness as she rounded the barn, her apron carefully cradled in her small hands. "Look how many we got today." Emma, with her golden curls and infectious smile, was the light that kept the darkness at bay. Where Thomas had grown solemn, Emma remained buoyant, finding joy in the smallest treasures, a particularly round egg, a wildflower pushing through the cracked earth, the dance of dust motes in a shaft of sunlight. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Sarah said, reaching out to smooth her daughter's unruly hair. "We'll have enough to trade with Mrs. Peterson for some sugar." The thought of such a simple luxury, sugar for the wild berries Emma had discovered growing near the creek, brought a momentary lightness to Sarah's chest. These small victories were what sustained them in a life that had become a daily battle against nature, isolation, and the constant, gnawing fear of what might come next. And what came next, Sarah could never have anticipated. The sound reached them first. Hoofbeats, multiple horses approaching fast, kicking up clouds of dust visible even from the cabin's porch. Sarah's heart seized with sudden terror. "Inside," she commanded, her voice low and urgent. "Both of you, now." Thomas hesitated, his young face hardening with stubborn courage. "But Pa's rifle." "Thomas James Colton, you get your sister inside this instant." Sarah's tone brooked no argument. As the children scrambled through the door, she followed, securing the latch with trembling hands. Through the small window, she watched the riders approach. 5 men, their faces obscured by bandanas, their intentions clear in the predatory way they circled the cabin. Well, a voice called out, rough with liquor and malice. "Looks like the widow Colton's home after all." Sarah's blood ran cold. She recognized that voice. Jack Dawson, a man who'd once offered to help her with the homestead, his eyes roaming over her body in a way that made her skin crawl. "I want you children under the bed," she whispered, reaching for John's shotgun mounted above the door. "Don't come out no matter what you hear." "Mama!" Emma's eyes were wide with fear. "Do as I say." Sarah checked the ammunition with practiced hands. John had insisted she learn to shoot, one of the many things she now thanked him for in silent prayers. "Mrs. Colton," Dawson's voice again, closer now. "We've come to make you a generous offer for this property. Being a woman alone, you must be finding it mighty difficult to manage." Sarah positioned herself beside the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm managing just fine, mister." "Dawson," she called back, fighting to keep her voice steady, "and I'm not interested in selling." A chorus of laughter greeted her words, ugly and menacing. "Now, that's not very neighborly," Dawson replied, "especially when we've ridden all this way. Why don't you open up so we can discuss terms like civilized folks?" "I think we can discuss just fine with this door between us," Sarah answered, raising the shotgun to her shoulder. A moment of silence followed, then the sound of boots hitting the ground. "Have it your way, widow." The first impact against the door made the entire cabin shudder. Sarah bit back a cry, her finger hovering near the trigger. They would break through soon. The door wasn't built to withstand such an assault. "When I get in there," Dawson shouted between blows, "you're gonna wish you'd been more accommodating." Sarah glanced at the bed where her children huddled, their eyes wide with terror. In that moment, she knew with bone-deep certainty that if these men entered her home, none of their lives would ever be the same. What happened next would forever blur in Sarah's memory, a confusion of shouts, gunfire, and the thunder of approaching hooves that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Through the window, she caught glimpses of a solitary rider moving with incredible speed, his long black hair streaming behind him as he charged into the midst of Dawson's men. An Apache warrior, his face painted for battle, wielding both traditional weapons and what appeared to be a stolen cavalry pistol. Sarah watched in stunned disbelief as the warrior engaged the bandits with lethal precision. One man fell, then another. Dawson and his remaining men scrambled for their horses, firing wildly as they retreated, dust billowing in their wake. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stood frozen, the shotgun still clutched in her trembling hands as the warrior dismounted and approached the cabin. His movement was cautious, deliberate, his dark eyes scanning for any remaining threat. Through the window, their gazes met, the Apache warrior and the widow, separated by wood and glass and centuries of mistrust. And in that moment, with the sun bleeding red across the western sky, their fates became irrevocably entangled. For what felt like an eternity, neither moved, the Apache warrior standing tall in the dust-strewn yard, Sarah rigid behind the window, her knuckles white around the shotgun's barrel. Through the warped glass, she studied him, younger than she'd first thought, perhaps no more than 28, with a face composed of sharp angles and watchful eyes. Unlike the Apache raiders she'd heard stories about, he wore a mix of traditional dress and items clearly taken from white settlers. A cavalry jacket too large for his frame hung open over his bare chest. The warrior raised his empty hands slowly, palms forward, a gesture of peace. Sarah's throat constricted. Every story she'd ever heard about the Apache tribes rang in her ears, tales of merciless raids, of settlers found mutilated, of children taken. Yet this man had just saved them from a fate perhaps equally terrible. "Thomas," she whispered, not taking her eyes from the window, "do you remember any of the Apache words Mr. Jensen taught you?" Thomas crawled from beneath the bed, his face pale but determined. A little "Ma." "Ask him what he wants." Thomas approached the window cautiously, peering out at the warrior. With a hesitant voice, he called out a greeting in broken Apache, a phrase taught by the old trapper who occasionally traded with the native tribes. The warrior's expression shifted. Surprise, then the faintest suggestion of approval. He responded in his own language, the words flowing like water over stones. Thomas shook his head. "I don't understand all of it, Ma, but I think he's saying the bad men will come back. We need to go." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. If Dawson and his men returned with reinforcements, "Ask him why he helped us," she instructed, her mind racing through impossible options. Thomas attempted the question, his pronunciation clumsy but earnest. The warrior was silent for a long moment, his gaze shifting to the graves visible on the small hill behind the cabin. 3 small markers and 1 larger one, John's final resting place beside the infants they'd lost over the years. Something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. He spoke again, gesturing toward the horizon, then to the cabin, then making a sweeping motion with his arm. "He says this land speaks to him," Thomas translated haltingly. "He's been watching our farm. He says the bad men have no honor." Sarah's breath caught. This warrior had been observing them. For how long? The thought should have terrified her. But instead, she felt a strange, reluctant gratitude warming her chest. Decision crystallized in her mind with sudden clarity. They couldn't stay here. Not now, not with Dawson and his men certain to return seeking revenge. And this warrior, whatever his reasons, offered their only chance. "Tell him we'll come with him," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Emma whimpered from beneath the bed. "Mama, no! The Indians will scalp us!" "Hush, Emma." Sarah knelt beside the bed, meeting her daughter's frightened eyes. "This man just saved our lives. If he wanted to hurt us, he would have let those men do it for him." She wasn't entirely convinced of her own words. But what choice did they have? With trembling hands, Sarah unlatched the door and stepped onto the porch. The shotgun still clutched in her arms, but no longer aimed. Thomas followed, positioning himself slightly in front of his mother in a protective stance that nearly broke Sarah's heart. Emma remained in the doorway, her small body pressed against the frame as if she might become invisible. Up close, the warrior was even more imposing, tall and lean, with muscles hardened by a life far more demanding than even frontier settlers endured. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pulling slightly at the corner of his mouth. His eyes, almost black in their intensity, assessed each of them in turn. He spoke again, this time in halting, heavily accented English. "Men come back. Soon. Many guns." Sarah nodded, surprised. "You speak English? Small words? Trader teach." He touched his chest. "Swift Arrow." His name an offering, a tiny bridge across the vast chasm between their worlds. "I'm Sarah Colton," she replied, then gestured to her children. "And this is Thomas, and that's Emma." Swift Arrow nodded once, then pointed urgently toward the eastern hills. "Go now. Bring food, water, small things only." The reality of what they were about to do crashed over Sarah like icy water. They were placing their lives in the hands of a stranger, an Apache warrior with unknown motives and loyalties. They would be leaving behind everything she and John had built together, perhaps never to return. "Thomas, help your sister pack 1 bag each. Clothes, the photograph of your father, and Emma's doll. I'll gather food." Sarah's voice was calm, belying the storm raging within her. As the children hurried inside, she addressed Swift Arrow again. "Why are you helping us?" Swift Arrow's gaze drifted once more to the graves on the hill. He touched his chest, then made a gesture Sarah couldn't interpret. "Child with no mother, bad medicine. Mother with no man." He struggled for the words, then simply shook his head. Sarah wasn't sure she understood, but there was no time to press further. Inside the cabin, she moved with desperate efficiency, wrapping cornbread and dried meat, filling canteens with water, her mind cataloguing and discarding possessions accumulated over a decade of marriage. What did one take when leaving a life behind? Her fingers brushed John's Bible, tucked beside their bed. She pressed it to her chest for a moment, then slipped it into her bag alongside a packet of seeds she'd been saving for spring planting. Hope and faith, the only luxuries she could afford to carry. Outside, Swift Arrow had readied his horse, a magnificent pinto stallion that pawed the ground impatiently. He whistled sharply, and to Sarah's astonishment, 3 more horses appeared from behind the barn, their own horses, saddled and ready. "You prepared for us to leave," she said, realization dawning, even before those men came. Swift Arrow's expression remained impassive, but his eyes held a glimmer of something, approval, perhaps, at her perception. Bad men watch many days. "I watch longer." He mounted his horse with fluid grace, then extended a hand toward Thomas. "Boy rides with me, women follow." Thomas straightened his shoulders and approached, allowing Swift Arrow to pull him up onto the horse. The boy's face was a mask of determined bravery, though Sarah could see the fear he fought to hide. As she helped Emma onto their mare and mounted her own horse, Sarah cast one last glance at the cabin, at the vegetable garden she'd tended so carefully, at the rocking chair on the porch where John had taught Thomas to whittle, at the wild rosebush she'd transplanted from her mother's garden back east. Swift Arrow's voice cut through her reverie. No look back. Only forward now. With those words, he urged his horse forward, leading them away from the only home her children had ever known, into the vast, unknown wilderness, and toward whatever fate awaited them among his people. They rode until the sun dipped below the western mountains, painting the sky in violent strokes of crimson and gold. The terrain grew increasingly unforgiving, jagged rock formations rising like the spines of sleeping giants, narrow passes that forced them to proceed single file, their horses' hooves clattering against stone, worn smooth by ancient floods. Swift Arrow led them along paths invisible to Sarah's eyes, occasionally dismounting to check for signs she couldn't discern. Thomas rode tall in front of Swift Arrow, his back straight, despite what must have been aching muscles, unaccustomed to such prolonged riding. Several times, Sarah caught her son asking quiet questions, which Swift Arrow answered in his sparse English, or with gestures that spoke more eloquently than words. Emma, who had begun the journey in tearful silence, now slumped against Sarah's chest, exhaustion finally overcoming fear. Sarah's own body protested with every mile, but she pushed the discomfort aside, focusing instead on the rhythm of the horses, gait, and the changing landscape around them. As twilight deepened into true darkness, Swift Arrow guided them into a sheltered canyon. A small spring bubbled from between rocks, feeding a modest pool before disappearing underground again. He dismounted in one fluid motion, helping Thomas down before approaching Sarah and Emma. "Rest here," he said, gesturing to a small cave entrance partially hidden by scrub brush. "Safe, water, no fire." Sarah nodded, too weary to question his judgment. She slid from the saddle, wincing as her feet touched the ground, then reached up to take Emma, who stirred and blinked drowsily. "Where are we, Mama?" the girl murmured. "Somewhere safe for tonight," Sarah answered, smoothing her daughter's tangled curls. "And can you stand, sweetheart?" Emma nodded bravely, though she swayed slightly when Sarah set her down. Thomas immediately went to his sister's side, taking her hand with a protectiveness that made Sarah's chest tighten. Swift Arrow had already begun caring for the horses, removing their saddles and bridles with practiced efficiency. Sarah hesitated, then moved to help him, ignoring the protest of her aching muscles. "I can do this," she said, reaching for her mare's bridle. "You've done enough already." Swift Arrow paused, regarding her with that same inscrutable expression. After a moment, he inclined his head slightly, not quite agreement, but acknowledgement of her capability. They worked in silence, Sarah following his example as he rubbed the horses down with handfuls of dry grass and led them to the spring to drink. When the animals were settled, Swift Arrow produced strips of dried meat from a pouch at his waist, offering them to Sarah with an open palm. "Eat," he said, "then sleep. Long ride tomorrow." Sarah accepted the meat with murmured thanks, returning to where her children had already spread a blanket in the shallow cave. The three of them huddled together, sharing the tough but nourishing strips of venison and sips from their canteens. "Will we ever go home again, Mama?" Emma asked, her voice small in the gathering darkness. Sarah hesitated, unwilling to offer false comfort, but equally reluctant to extinguish hope. "I don't know, darling, but remember what your father always said. Home isn't just a place, it's wherever we're together." Emma seemed to consider this, her small face solemn in the moonlight filtering through the cave entrance. "Is the Indian man going to stay with us?" "His name is Swift Arrow," Thomas corrected before Sarah could answer. "And he knows everything about surviving out here. He showed me how he tracks. He can tell how many men were at our farm and when they'll come back just by looking at the ground." The admiration in her son's voice gave Sarah pause. In the span of mere hours, Swift Arrow had apparently earned a degree of Thomas's respect that Sarah knew wasn't given lightly. "Swift Arrow is taking us somewhere safe," she said carefully. "After that, we'll see." From his position at the cave entrance, Swift Arrow watched their whispered conversation, his dark silhouette motionless against the star-filled sky. Though he gave no indication of listening, Sarah sensed his awareness, a predator's attentiveness to every movement, every sound. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Sarah long after her children's breathing had deepened and steadied. Her mind raced with questions about what lay ahead, with grief for what they'd left behind, with fear of the unknown. When she finally drifted into uneasy slumber, her dreams were filled with pursuing hoofbeats and the echoing crack of gunfire. She woke with a start to find dawn breaking over the eastern ridges, bathing the canyon in pale golden light. Swift Arrow was already moving about the camp, checking the horses and scanning the surrounding terrain with alert eyes. Had he slept at all? "Oh, good morning," she ventured, carefully extricating herself from her still sleeping children. Swift Arrow nodded once, then gestured toward the spring. "Wash, then go." Sarah bit back a retort at his commanding tone. This was his territory, his expertise. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when her children's lives hung in the balance. At the spring, she splashed cold water on her face and neck, the shock of it clearing the last cobwebs of sleep from her mind. As she straightened, she caught sight of Swift Arrow kneeling beside Emma, who had apparently woken while Sarah was away from the cave. To her astonishment, her daughter was giggling softly as Swift Arrow folded a small piece of rawhide into the shape of a rabbit, his nimble fingers creating the illusion of twitching ears and a bobbing tail. The transformation in Emma's demeanor was remarkable. The fear that had shadowed her young face since they'd fled the cabin, now replaced by childlike wonder. Swift Arrow glanced up, catching Sarah's gaze. For the briefest moment, something like embarrassment flickered across his features before his expression resumed its usual stoicism. He rose smoothly, handing the leather rabbit to Emma before returning to his inspection of their surroundings. As they prepared to leave, gathering their meager belongings and saddling the horses, Sarah found herself watching Swift Arrow with new eyes. There was a gentleness beneath his warrior's exterior, evident in the way he'd fashioned a toy for Emma, in how carefully he'd lifted Thomas onto his horse, in the small bundle of wild berries he'd silently collected and now offered to the children for their breakfast. They were on the trail again before the sun had fully cleared the horizon, Swift Arrow setting a pace that was demanding but not punishing. The landscape grew increasingly unfamiliar to Sarah. Massive rock formations unlike anything near their homestead, valleys thick with vegetation she couldn't name, dry riverbeds that Swift Arrow studied with particular attention before allowing them to cross. By midday, the heat had become oppressive, shimmering in waves over the baked earth. Swift Arrow led them to a stand of cottonwoods beside another spring, a blessed oasis of shade and cool water. As they dismounted to rest the horses, he approached Sarah, his expression grave. "Apache land now," he said, gesturing to the surrounding countryside. "My people," he hesitated, searching for words. "Not all welcome white eyes." Sarah's stomach tightened with renewed anxiety. "Will we be in danger?" Swift Arrow's gaze was direct, unflinching. "I break tribal law, bring outsiders to sacred land. Help white family." He touched the knife at his belt. "Maybe fight my own people for you." The weight of his words settled over Sarah like a physical burden. This man, this stranger, had risked far more than she'd realized to save them from Dawson's gang. Whatever his reasons, whatever compelled him to extend protection to a white widow and her children, it might cost him everything. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why would you do that for us?" Swift Arrow was silent for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, edged with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "Many seasons ago, white soldiers killed my wife, my son." His hand moved unconsciously to the scar that marred his face. "I watched them die. Could not save them." His eyes, when they met hers, held memories of a pain so raw and familiar that Sarah felt it echo in her own grieving heart. "Now I watch your children, your farm. I see danger come. This time, I save." Understanding dawned like a cold, clear light. Swift Arrow's protection wasn't merely kindness or some abstract sense of honor. It was redemption. A chance to rewrite his personal tragedy with a different ending. Before Sarah could respond, Swift Arrow stiffened, his attention snapping to the ridgeline above them. In one swift motion, he knocked an arrow to the bow he carried, his entire body alert to a threat Sarah neither saw nor heard. "What is it?" she whispered, instinctively moving toward her children. Swift Arrow's voice was barely audible, a breath of sound carried on the hot, still air. "Apache scouts." "My tribe." His dark eyes found hers, conveying a warning more eloquent than words. "They find us now." They materialized like spirits from the shimmering heat, 3 Apache warriors on horseback, their faces painted for scouting, weapons at the ready. Sarah pulled Emma close, feeling her daughter's rapid heartbeat against her side. Thomas stood frozen, halfway between his mother and Swift Arrow, caught between the instinct to protect his family and his growing trust in their guide. Swift Arrow lowered his bow but didn't unstring the arrow. He called out in his native language, his voice carrying across the distance with authority that needed no translation. The lead scout responded, his tone sharp with disapproval. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, the accusation in them was unmistakable. His gaze swept over the Coltons with cold contempt before returning to Swift Arrow. A rapid exchange followed, Swift Arrow's replies becoming increasingly terse. Sarah watched the muscles in his back tighten, his posture shifting subtly to place himself more firmly between the scouts and her family. What are they saying?" Thomas whispered, edging back towards Sarah and Emma. "They angry," Swift Arrow answered without turning. "Say I betrayed tribe, bring enemies to sacred land." He spoke another phrase to the scouts, this one delivered with unmistakable finality. The lead scout's expression hardened. He issued what sounded like a command, gesturing sharply toward the direction from which they'd come. Swift Arrow shook his head once. "Do we go to village?" he said to Sarah, his voice low. "Face tribal council. Chief many horses decide." "And if we refuse?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Swift Arrow's gaze met hers briefly. "Then we die here," Emma whimpered, burying her face against Sarah's skirt. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair with a hand she fought to keep steady, her mind racing through options that dwindled with each passing moment. "I will go with you," she said finally. What choice did they have? Swift Arrow nodded, speaking again to the scouts. One of them departed immediately, riding hard toward the east, presumably to warn the village of their approach. The remaining two positioned themselves on either side of their small party, their expressions making it clear that this was now an escort rather than a rescue. They rode in tense silence, the scouts occasionally exchanging words that Swift Arrow didn't translate. The terrain grew more rugged, with narrow passes that forced them to proceed single file and steep inclines that tested both horses and riders. Despite her fear, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at the harsh beauty surrounding them, ancient rock formations sculpted by wind and time, unexpected pockets of vibrant wildflowers clinging to seemingly barren soil, vast expanses of sky so blue it almost hurt to look at it. Late afternoon brought them to a secluded valley nestled between protective ridges. The Apache village sprawled before them, dozens of wickiups arranged in a pattern Sarah couldn't decipher, smoke rising from cooking fires, horses corralled in a natural enclosure formed by a bend in the small stream that bisected the settlement. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. Women paused in their work, children stopped their play, and warriors emerged from wickiups with hands hovering near weapons. The silence that fell over the village was more menacing than any outright hostility might have been. As they rode toward the center of the settlement, Sarah felt dozens of eyes upon them, some curious, most hostile, all wary. Emma pressed closer to her, while Thomas sat rigidly in his saddle, his young face a mask of determined courage. An elderly man emerged from the largest wickiup, his silver hair hanging in two long braids adorned with eagle feathers. Though time had bent his frame, there was nothing frail about his bearing or the sharp intelligence in his dark eyes. A woman followed him, younger, perhaps 40, with a proud, severe beauty and an air of authority that matched the old chief's. "Chief Many Horses," Swift Arrow said quietly to Sarah, and Singing Dove, his daughter. They dismounted, Swift Arrow moving with deliberate respect as he approached the chief. The formal greeting that followed was conducted entirely in Apache, but Sarah could read the tension in every line of Swift Arrow's body. Chief Many Horses listened without expression, his gaze shifting occasionally to study Sarah and her children. When Swift Arrow finished speaking, the old chief responded with measured words that seemed to carry the weight of judgment. Singing Dove stepped forward, addressing Swift Arrow with unmistakable anger. Unlike her father's controlled demeanor, hers blazed with open contempt, her gestures sharp and accusatory as she pointed repeatedly at the Coltons. Swift Arrow's response was quiet but firm. He gestured towards Sarah, then to the children, then made a motion that reminded Sarah of rocking a baby. "What's happening?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before Swift Arrow could answer, Singing Dove approached them directly. Unlike most of the tribe, who kept their distance as if the Coltons carried disease, she came close enough that Sarah could see the intricate patterns tattooed along her jawline. "You bring death to our people?" she said in surprisingly fluent English, each word precise and cutting. "The white man's army follows the white man's women and children." Sarah lifted her chin, meeting the woman's hostile gaze. "We didn't ask to come here. Swift Arrow saved us from men who would have killed us, or worse. We're grateful for his protection, but we have no wish to bring harm to your people." Singing Dove's eyes narrowed. "Yet harm follows you like shadow follows sun." She turned back to Swift Arrow, speaking rapid Apache that needed no translation to convey its vehemence. Swift Arrow remained impassive, responding only when she had finished. His words, whatever they were, caused a murmur to ripple through the gathered tribe. Chief Many Horses raised a hand, silencing the whispers. He spoke at length, his tone carrying the unmistakable authority of final judgment. When he finished, Swift Arrow's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, whether from relief or resignation, Sarah couldn't tell. "What did he say?" she asked, as Swift Arrow turned back to them. "We stay," he replied. 3 days. Council decides then. His eyes met hers, conveying what his limited English could not. "I am responsible for you now. Your actions, my honor." Sarah understood the weight of that statement. Swift Arrow had tied his fate to theirs. Whatever judgment the council ultimately rendered would fall on him as surely as on them. "Where will we sleep?" she asked, practicality overriding the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Swift Arrow gestured toward a small wickiup set slightly apart from the others. "There, my home." He hesitated, then added, "Safe for now." As they moved toward the dwelling, the crowd of Apache parted reluctantly, like water flowing around stones. Sarah felt their stares, curious, hostile, judging, and tightened her grip on Emma's hand. "Mama," Emma whispered, her eyes wide with mingled fear and fascination. "Are we prisoners?" Sarah glanced at Swift Arrow, who walked ahead of them with rigid dignity, despite the murmurs that followed their passage. "No, sweetheart," she replied softly. "I think we're his responsibility, and somehow that seemed both more significant and more dangerous than mere captivity." Swift Arrow's dwelling was simple but meticulously maintained. A domed structure of interwoven branches covered with hides and grasses that proved surprisingly cool despite the desert heat. Inside, woven mats covered the packed earth floor, and various tools and weapons hung from the supporting poles. In one corner lay a pallet of soft furs. In another, a small fire pit beneath a smoke hole in the ceiling. "You sleep here," Swift Arrow said, gesturing to the pallet. "I guard outside." "We can't take your bed," Sarah protested. Swift Arrow's expression remained impassive. "Children need rest. You too." His tone brooked no argument as he ducked back through the low entrance, leaving them alone in the unfamiliar space. Emma clung to Sarah's skirts, her earlier curiosity dampened by the hostility they'd encountered. "Are they going to hurt us, Mama?" Sarah crouched to meet her daughter's eyes. "No, sweetheart, Swift Arrow won't let that happen." The certainty in her voice surprised her. When had she come to trust this man so completely? Thomas had already begun exploring the wickiup, examining the craftsmanship of the weapons and tools with undisguised admiration. "Look at this bow, Ma. And these arrows, the balance is perfect." "Thomas, don't touch things that aren't yours," Sarah admonished gently, though she too found herself drawn to the evidence of Swift Arrow's skill. Every item in the dwelling served a purpose, crafted with both functionality and beauty in mind. A shadow darkened the entrance as a young Apache woman appeared, her arms laden with a clay pot and woven baskets. Unlike the others in the village, her expression held no hostility, only a guarded curiosity. She spoke softly in Apache, setting her burdens on the ground near the fire pit. "Food," she said in halting English, gesturing to the offerings. "Water," she pointed to herself. "Morning star." "Thank you, Morning Star," Sarah replied, inclining her head in what she hoped was a respectful gesture. "I'm Sarah. These are my children, Thomas and Emma." Morning Star's gaze lingered on the children, her expression softening slightly. She said something in Apache, then appeared frustrated by her inability to communicate further. "Swift arrow friend," she finally managed, the question tentative. Sarah hesitated, unsure how to define their complicated relationship. "Yes," she answered simply. "He saved us," Morningstar nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. She touched her chest, then gestured toward Swift Arrow's position outside. "Cousin." With that, she withdrew, leaving them to their meal. The food was unfamiliar but surprisingly flavorful, a rich stew of game meat and wild plants, accompanied by a flat bread unlike anything Sarah had tasted before. After the physical and emotional exhaustion of the past 2 days, they ate ravenously. As darkness fell, the sounds of the village changed. Drums began a rhythmic pulse. Voices rose in songs whose meaning Sarah couldn't fathom, but whose beauty transcended language. Emma, initially frightened by the unfamiliar cadences, gradually relaxed as the music continued, her eyelids growing heavy. "It's pretty," she murmured sleepily as Sarah helped her onto the fur pallet. "Yes, it is," Sarah agreed, smoothing her daughter's hair, different from our hymns, but beautiful in its own way. Thomas had settled near the entrance, peering out at the activities in the village center. "They're dancing around the fire," he reported. "And I think they're telling stories. Swift Arrow is watching, but he's not joining in." Sarah joined her son at the entrance, careful to remain in the shadows. In the flickering firelight, she could see Swift Arrow seated slightly apart from his tribe, his profile etched against the flames. Despite being physically present, he seemed isolated, whether by choice or exclusion, she couldn't tell. "You should sleep too, Thomas," she said softly. "Or tomorrow will bring its own challenges." With surprising obedience, Thomas retreated to the pallet beside his already sleeping sister. Sarah remained at the entrance, watching the celebration continue under a sky ablaze with stars. The music spoke of something primal and enduring, a connection to the land and to ancestors that settlers like herself, always pushing westward, couldn't fully comprehend. She didn't realize Swift Arrow had approached until his shadow fell across her. He offered a small, wooden cup filled with a steaming liquid that smelled of herbs and honey. "Tea," he said. "Good for sleep." Sarah accepted it gratefully, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Thank you for everything." Swift Arrow settled beside her, his gaze fixed on the celebration rather than on her face. "Morning Star, bring food?" "Yes." She was kind. He nodded, satisfaction evident in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. Her husband died last winter, hunting accident. She understand. He gestured vaguely, searching for words. Loss, empty place inside. The simple description struck Sarah with its accuracy. That was precisely what grief felt like, an empty place that nothing could quite fill. "Your cousin doesn't seem to share the tribe's hostility toward us," she observed. "Morning Star sees with heart, not just eyes." Swift Arrow's voice held a warmth Sarah hadn't heard before. "Like you." The unexpected compliment caught her off guard. Before she could respond, he continued, his tone shifting to one of grave concern. "Tomorrow hard. Council asks many questions. Singing dove want you gone." He turned to face her directly, his dark eyes intense in the starlight. "Some say kill white family. Send message to soldiers." A chill ran through Sarah despite the warm night. "And what do you say?" Swift Arrow was silent for a long moment. "I say..." He hesitated, struggling with the language. "I say life sacred. Children, innocent, widow strong like Apache woman. There was admiration in his voice, and something more, a recognition that transcended the barriers between them. Chief, listen to me still. But Singing Dove has strong voice too. His expression grew troubled. She lose husband, 2 sons in army attack. Hate fills her heart now. Sarah understood then why the woman's English had been so fluent. She'd likely learned it before that devastating loss turned knowledge into a weapon. What can I do? Sarah asked quietly. How can I prove we mean no harm? Swift Arrow considered her question with the seriousness it deserved. Respect our ways. Learn. Show courage. His mouth curved in what might have been the ghost of a smile. This you already do. From inside the wickiup, Emma called out in her sleep, a small sound of distress. Sarah rose immediately, maternal instinct overriding all other concerns. Go, Swift Arrow said, understanding in his eyes. Children need mother's heart. As Sarah turned to comfort her daughter, Swift Arrow's voice followed her, soft but clear in the desert night. I keep watch, always. 3 simple words, yet they carried a weight of promise that Sarah felt settle around her shoulders like a protective blanket. Whatever came tomorrow, they would face it together. Dawn broke over the Apache village with a silence that seemed almost reverent. The first golden rays illuminating the eastern ridges before spilling into the valley below. Sarah woke to find Emma and Thomas still sleeping soundly, their faces peaceful in repose. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine they were back home, that John would be outside tending the livestock, that the day ahead would unfold with the comfortable predictability of their former life. The illusion shattered as she emerged from the wickiup into the cool morning air. Swift Arrow sat nearby, sharpening a knife with smooth, practiced strokes. He hadn't been exaggerating about keeping watch. Sarah suspected he'd spent the entire night awake, vigilant against threats both from within and without the tribe. Good morning, she said softly. Conscious of the eyes that followed her movements from various points around the village, Swift Arrow nodded, sheathing his knife. Council meets when sun reaches highest point. He gestured toward a group of women gathering by the stream. Morning Star, wait for you there. Show woman's work. Sarah understood the implication immediately. To earn acceptance, she would need to participate in tribal life, to demonstrate her willingness to learn their ways rather than impose her own. Thank you, she said simply, then hesitated. Thomas will want to be near you. A flicker of something like pride crossed Swift Arrow's face. Boy has good heart, strong spirit. I teach him today. The prospect of being separated from her son in this unfamiliar environment sent a surge of anxiety through Sarah, but she forced herself to nod. Thomas needed this, needed to learn, to grow, to find his place in a world suddenly turned upside down. And Swift Arrow, she admitted to herself, was perhaps better equipped than she to guide him through that process. What about Emma? She asked. Children play there. Swift Arrow pointed toward a shaded area where several Apache children were already engaged in some form of game. Apache children curious about yellow hair. Be kind if she brave enough to join. Sarah wasn't sure Emma would be, but she appreciated the consideration. I'll suggest it when she wakes. To her surprise, Emma emerged from the wickiup at that moment, rubbing sleep from her eyes. When she spotted Swift Arrow, a shy smile spread across her face. Good morning, Mr. Swift Arrow, she said with the careful politeness Sarah had instilled in her. Did the leather rabbit sleep too? Swift Arrow's expression softened in a way Sarah had seen only when he interacted with the children. From a pouch at his waist, He produced the small toy he'd made for Emma the previous day. "Rabbit watch stars all night," he said gravely. "They now very sleepy," Emma giggled, accepting the toy with reverent hands. "I'll make him a bed so he can rest." Sarah marveled at the change in her daughter, the child who'd once hidden behind her skirts, now conversing comfortably with the Apache warrior. Children, she reflected, often saw truth more clearly than adults, unobscured by prejudice or past traumas. After a simple breakfast of dried meat and berries, Sarah made her way to the stream where Morning Star waited. The other Apache women eyed her with unconcealed suspicion, some turning their backs deliberately as she approached. Morning Star greeted her with a brief nod, then handed her a clay pot. Through gestures and the few English words she knew, Morning Star indicated that Sarah should help gather water, then join the women in scraping and preparing hides, a messy, laborious process that soon had Sarah's arms aching and her hands raw. She worked without complaint, conscious of the evaluating glances cast her way. Gradually, the open hostility gave way to grudging acknowledgement of her willingness to work. One elderly woman, her face deeply lined with age, eventually offered Sarah a protective paste to rub on her hands, a small kindness that brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. Meanwhile, Thomas had joined Swift Arrow and several other men, learning to fashion arrows with flint heads. The boy's natural dexterity and eager attention earned approving nods from the Apache craftsmen, though they maintained a careful distance. Emma, after initial hesitation, had ventured toward the playing children. Her blonde curls and blue calico dress made her conspicuously different, and for several painful minutes, Sarah had watched her daughter stand alone at the group's periphery. Then one girl, perhaps 7 or 8, had approached Emma with cautious curiosity. Words weren't necessary, as the girl touched Emma's hair with wonder, then offered a small woven doll in exchange for holding the leather rabbit. Soon, Emma was included in their games, her laughter blending with theirs in the universal language of childhood. By midday, when the council gathered beneath a large ramada at the village center, Sarah felt as though she'd lived a lifetime in the span of a single morning. Her muscles protested every movement. Her skin was reddened by sun and exertion, but she held herself with dignity as Swift Arrow led them to stand before Chief Many Horses and the tribal elders. Singing Dove was present as well, her position at her father's right hand indicating her importance in the tribe's hierarchy. Her gaze, when it fell upon Sarah, was cold and assessing. The questioning began in Apache, with Swift Arrow translating as best he could with his limited English. Why had they come to Apache lands? What did they know of the army's movements? Did they have other white men waiting to attack the village? Sarah answered truthfully, explaining their isolated homestead, the attack by Dawson and his men, and Swift Arrow's timely intervention. She emphasized that they sought only temporary safety, with no intention of bringing harm to the tribe. As Singing Dove's turn to speak came, she switched to English, clearly preferring to address Sarah directly rather than through Swift Arrow's translation. "You say pretty words, white woman," she said, her voice carrying to the assembled tribe. "But white promises are like rain in desert, quickly gone, leaving only thirst behind." Sarah met her gaze steadily. "I don't make promises I can't keep. I'm a mother protecting her children, just as you protect your people. We have that in common, at least." Singing Dove's eyes flashed. "We have nothing in common. Your people took my husband, my sons. They destroyed our hunting grounds, poisoned our water. Now you come here bringing your white ways, your white god. I didn't bring war to your people," Sarah replied quietly. "I'm sorry for your losses. I know what it is to lose those you love. My husband died too, leaving me alone to raise our children. Your husband died of fever, Singing Dove countered. Mine died screaming beneath army knives as they took his scalp for bounty. A murmur ran through the gathered tribe at this bitter reminder of atrocities committed against them. Sarah felt a chill despite the midday heat, acutely aware of how precarious their position was. Swift Arrow stepped forward, addressing the council in Apache. Though Sarah couldn't understand his words, she could hear the conviction in his voice, the way he gestured first to her, then to the children, then placed his hand over his heart in what appeared to be a solemn vow. Chief Many Horses listened impassively, his aged face revealing nothing of his thoughts. When Swift Arrow finished speaking, the old chief posed a question that caused a visible reaction among the council members. Swift Arrow straightened, his answer clear and unequivocal, though incomprehensible to Sarah. "What did he ask you?" she whispered, when Swift Arrow returned to her side. "If I claim responsibility for White family," Swift Arrow replied, his voice equally low. "If I become husband to widow, father to children." Sarah's breath caught. "And you said yes." Before he could answer, the quiet of the gathering was shattered by a commotion at the village's edge. A scout burst into the council area, his horse lathered with sweat, his words tumbling out in an urgent stream. The effect on the assembled Apache was immediate and electric. Warriors reached for weapons, women began gathering children, and an atmosphere of controlled panic descended over what had moments before been an orderly proceeding. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, instinctively pulling Emma close as Thomas pressed against her side. Swift Arrow's expression was grim as he translated the scout's news. "Soldiers, blue coats, coming this way." His dark eyes met hers, a question in their depths. "They look for you, maybe, or just hunt Apache. Either way, bring death." Chief Many Horses rose, issuing commands with the authority of decades of leadership. The council disbanded immediately, everyone moving with purposeful urgency. Singing Dove approached them, her earlier hostility now edged with something more dangerous, the cold calculation of survival. "If soldiers find you here," she said to Sarah, "they kill everyone. Men, women, children, all Apache die because of white woman." Without waiting for a response, she turned to Swift Arrow, speaking rapidly in their shared language. Whatever she said caused his jaw to tighten, his hand to move unconsciously to the knife at his belt. "What did she say?" Sarah asked, when Singing Dove had gone. Swift Arrow's reply was blunt, devoid of softening. "She say give you to soldiers. Trade white family for Apache safety." The ground seemed to sway beneath Sarah's feet. "And what did you say?" His eyes, when they met hers, burned with a fierce determination that left no room for doubt. "I say I die first." The village transformed before Sarah's eyes, its people moving with the practiced efficiency of those who had fled persecution countless times before. Women dismantled wiki-ups with astonishing speed, children gathered essential belongings, and warriors prepared horses for immediate departure. There was remarkably little panic, only purposeful urgency. Communication reduced to terse instructions and nods of acknowledgement. "What can we do to help?" Sarah asked Swift Arrow, determined not to be a burden. He assessed her for a brief moment, then nodded as if confirming something to himself. "Help Morning Star, children too." Without hesitation, Sarah guided Thomas and Emma toward Morning Star, who was methodically packing cooking implements and food stores into hide containers. The woman's face was tense but composed as she demonstrated what needed to be done. Her few English words supplemented by gestures that required no translation. As they worked, Sarah became aware of Singing Dove watching from a distance, her expression calculating. The woman's suggestion to surrender them to the soldiers hung in the air like a physical presence, a solution too logical to be dismissed entirely by a tribe whose survival had always depended on pragmatic decisions. Swift Arrow returned with Chief Many Horses, the old leader moving with surprising agility despite his years. The chief spoke rapidly, pointing toward the eastern ridge, then to the stream that ran through the valley. "Chief says soldiers follow stream," Swift Arrow translated. "Find village soon. Too many to fight." He glanced at Sarah, conflict evident in his eyes. "Most tribe go north to mountain caves. Hard journey. Children, old ones may not." He didn't finish the thought, but Sarah understood. Some might not survive such a difficult evacuation. "What about us?" Thomas asked, straightening to his full height, though fear was evident in the trembling of his hands. Swift Arrow placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, a gesture of both comfort and respect. "You come with me. Different path." "You're separating us from the tribe," Sarah realized aloud, "to protect them." Swift Arrow nodded, his expression grave. "Your tracks easy to follow. White children, white woman. If soldiers find you with tribe..." Again, he left the consequence unspoken. Chief Many Horses addressed Sarah directly, speaking in Apache with dignity and surprising gentleness. When he finished, he placed a weathered hand briefly on her head in what felt like a blessing. "He say you have mother's courage," Swift Arrow translated. "Ask forgiveness for tribe's anger. Say sometimes fear makes people forget honor." Tears sprang unexpectedly to Sarah's eyes at this acknowledgement, not just of her own worth, but of the universal humanity that transcended the barriers between their peoples. "Please tell him I understand, and that I'm grateful for the shelter his tribe provided." As Swift Arrow translated her words, a commotion arose near the village perimeter. Singing Dove approached with several warriors, her movements sharp with contained fury. "You endanger everyone," she said to Swift Arrow, reverting to English so Sarah could understand her accusation. "Taking them away draws soldiers after you, away from our people. You choose white family over Apache." Swift Arrow's face remained impassive, though Sarah saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. "I choose life for all," he replied evenly. "Soldiers follow white woman tracks. I make sure tracks lead away from tribe. And if they catch you, if they make you tell where our people hide..." Singing Dove's eyes narrowed. "White woman is not worth such risk." "Not your choice to make," Swift Arrow responded, a new edge to his voice. Chief decided. For a moment, it seemed Singing Dove might challenge this assertion, but Chief Many Horses stepped forward, his authoritative presence ending the confrontation before it could escalate further. He spoke briefly to his daughter, who reluctantly inclined her head in submission, though her eyes still burned with disagreement. Swift Arrow turned to Sarah. "We leave now. Bring only what you carry easy." As Sarah and the children gathered their meager belongings, Morning Star approached with small packages wrapped in hide, food for their journey. The woman pressed these into Sarah's hands, then, to Sarah's surprise, embraced her briefly. "Be strong," Morning Star whispered, her accent thick but her meaning clear. "He good man?" "Trust." Swift Arrow had readied 4 horses, his own pinto stallion, and the 3 that had belonged to the Coltons. He'd loaded them with water skins, weapons, and essential supplies, leaving room for the riders to mount without hindrance. As they prepared to depart, Chief Many Horses raised his hand in farewell. Much of the tribe had already left, moving northward in small groups to avoid creating an obvious trail. But a few remained to complete the village's dismantling, including Singing Dove, whose gaze followed them with undisguised suspicion. "Which way are we going?" Thomas asked as Swift Arrow led them away from the village, moving not north with the tribe, but westward, toward more exposed terrain. "First, make clear trail," Swift Arrow replied. "Want soldiers follow us, not tribe." Sarah understood the strategy with a mixture of admiration and dread. "You're using us as bait." Swift Arrow glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. "Using me as bait. You come because—" He hesitated, searching for words. "Because I responsible now." They rode hard for nearly an hour, making no attempt to conceal their passage. Swift Arrow deliberately led them across open ground, where their tracks would be unmistakable, even pausing occasionally to ensure the trail was obvious enough for pursuing soldiers to follow. Emma, exhausted by the pace and the fear, began to droop in her saddle. Without comment, Swift Arrow maneuvered his horse alongside hers and lifted the girl onto his mount, positioning her securely in front of him. Emma leaned back against his chest, her small body relaxing as she surrendered to the protection of his strong arms. The simple action, performed without hesitation or request, stirred something profound in Sarah's chest. A recognition of the care this man extended to her children, asking nothing in return. When they reached a rocky outcropping overlooking a vast expanse of scrubland, Swift Arrow finally halted. "Rest, horses," he said, dismounting carefully to avoid disturbing the now sleeping Emma. "Then change direction." Sarah slid from her horse with relief, her muscles protesting after the hard ride. Thomas did the same, his young face serious, as he immediately began checking his mount as Swift Arrow had taught him. "The soldiers will still be able to track us, won't they?" Sarah asked, accepting Emma from Swift Arrow's arms. "Even if we change direction," Swift Arrow's mouth curved in the ghost of a smile. "Not after next part of plan." He led them to a narrow gap between boulders, barely visible unless one knew exactly where to look. The passage twisted sharply, opening into a small, sheltered hollow invisible from the surrounding terrain. A trickle of water seeped from the rock face, feeding a tiny pool before disappearing into the ground. "Old Apache hiding place," Swift Arrow explained. "Rest here, eat. I go back, make false trail." "You're leaving us." The question escaped before Sarah could stop it, her voice betraying more fear than she intended. Swift Arrow regarded her steadily. "Few hours only. Make tracks look like we go south. Soldiers follow. Find nothing." He handed her his knife, the same one he'd been sharpening that morning. "You keep—" "Know how to use," Sarah nodded, recalling the lessons John had given her years ago. "Yes." "Good. Stay hidden. Make no fire. I return before dark." He hesitated, then added, "Trust me, I do," Sarah replied, realizing with some surprise that it was true. Somehow, in the space of mere days, this man had earned a faith she hadn't extended to anyone since John's death. After Swift Arrow departed, Sarah settled Emma in a sheltered nook, covering her with the light blanket they'd brought from the village. Thomas explored the small hollow with restless energy, examining the rock formations and sparse vegetation with the curiosity that seemed intrinsic to his nature. "Ma," he said suddenly, his voice hushed with realization, "I think Swift Arrow's going to lead the soldiers away himself, make them chase him instead of us." Sarah had suspected the same thing, but hearing it articulated sent a chill through her. "That would be very dangerous." Thomas nodded solemnly. "He's not afraid, though. Not for himself." He looked at his mother directly, with a perception beyond his years. "He cares about us, doesn't he?" "Not just because of his promise." "I believe he does," Sarah answered softly. "Is he going to be our new pa?" The question was asked with such straightforward innocence that it momentarily robbed Sarah of breath. Thomas, it's not that simple. Swift Arrow and I, we come from different worlds. His people may not even accept us. But they might, Thomas persisted. The chief seemed to think it was possible. And Swift Arrow already said yes when they asked if he'd be responsible for us. Sarah sighed, unsure how to explain the complexities of cultural differences, of prejudice, of the dangers that would face a family that bridged two hostile worlds. Let's focus on surviving today, she said finally. The future will have to take care of itself. The hours crept by with agonizing slowness. Emma woke and asked repeatedly for Swift Arrow, her childish attachment to the warrior growing stronger with each act of kindness he showed her. Sarah kept both children close, straining for any sound that might indicate approaching soldiers or Swift Arrow's return. It was nearly dusk when they heard it, the distant thunder of hoofbeats, many horses moving at speed. Sarah's heart leapt to her throat as she hurried the children deeper into the hollow, pressing them against the rock wall with fierce whispers to remain absolutely silent. The sound grew louder, then began to fade as the riders passed their hiding place without pausing. Through a gap in the rocks, Sarah caught a glimpse of blue uniforms, at least a dozen soldiers riding hard, following what must have been Swift Arrow's false trail. Relief made her knees weak, but it was short-lived. Where was Swift Arrow? Had he successfully diverted the soldiers, or had they captured him? Worse, had they shot him on sight? As she knew many army patrols were inclined to do with Apache warriors. Full darkness had fallen by the time they heard a soft, owl-like call from the entrance to their hiding place. Thomas immediately brightened, recognizing the signal Swift Arrow had taught him during their journey. "It's him," the boy whispered excitedly, returning the call as instructed. Swift Arrow appeared like a shadow materializing from the night, his movements silent despite his evident exhaustion. Emma ran to him immediately, all protocol forgotten, as she wrapped her arms around his legs in a display of relief that would have been comical under less dire circumstances. "Soldiers gone?" Sarah asked, her own relief making her voice unsteady. Swift Arrow nodded, briefly returning Emma's embrace before gently disengaging. "Follow false trail south. Think we heading to Mexico border." His expression was grim despite the success of his plan. "But they send runner to Fort Morgan. More soldiers come soon. Search wider." "What do we do now?" Thomas asked, his faith in Swift Arrow's ability to protect them unwavering. Swift Arrow looked at each of them in turn, his gaze lingering on Sarah's face before he answered, "Now we disappear." Before dawn broke over the eastern ridges, Swift Arrow had them moving again, but in a manner Sarah would never have anticipated. Instead of riding, they walked, leading the horses single file through terrain so rugged it seemed impossible to navigate in the pre-dawn darkness. Swift Arrow moved with absolute certainty, his intimate knowledge of the land evident in every confident step. "Horses leave tracks," he explained when Sarah questioned their slow progress. "We walk where rocks tell no stories." He had altered their appearance as well. Using a mixture of earth and plant material, he darkened the children's fair hair and skin, making them less conspicuously white at a distance. He'd instructed Sarah to rebraid her hair in the Apache style Morning Star had shown her, and to wear a shawl of muted colors that Morning Star had pressed upon her before their departure. These precautions, combined with their careful route through rocky terrain, made them nearly invisible, just another Apache family moving through the vast wilderness. It was a deception that might not withstand close inspection, but it only needed to work from afar. They traveled this way for hours, Swift Arrow setting a pace that challenged the children but never pushed them beyond endurance. When Emma's steps began to falter, he simply lifted her onto his shoulders without breaking stride, her small hands clasping trustingly around his neck. By midday, they had reached a series of tiered rock formations that rose like a natural fortress from the desert floor. Swift Arrow led them along a barely perceptible path that zigzagged upward, eventually revealing a narrow opening in the stone face. "Cave," he said, ushering them inside. "Deep. Cool water. Safe place." The entrance widened immediately into a spacious cavern, cool and dimly lit by the sunlight filtering through cracks in the ceiling. The air smelled faintly of minerals and ancient earth. A small pool of crystalline water occupied one corner, fed by a steady drip from above. "We rest here," Swift Arrow continued, helping Emma down from his shoulders. "Sleep during day. Travel when dark, like owls," Emma said with unexpected delight, her fear momentarily forgotten in the adventure of it all. Swift Arrow's mouth curved in that rare, fleeting smile. "Yes, wise like owls." While the children explored the cave under Swift Arrow's watchful eye, Sarah took stock of their supplies. The food Morning Star had provided would last a few days if carefully rationed. Water, thanks to the pool, wasn't a concern. But the future, beyond these immediate needs, stretched before her like an unmarked map. "Where are we going?" she asked Swift Arrow, when the children had settled into an impromptu game involving the leather rabbit and stones arranged as imaginary village buildings. He joined her at the cave entrance, his gaze scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. "Place I know. 3 days, journey, canyon with good water, fertile soil." He glanced at her. "A good place for new beginning. You've planned this carefully," Sarah observed. "Did you always intend to take us away from your tribe?" Swift Arrow was silent for a long moment. After counsel asked if I become responsible, "I think maybe need place away from both peoples. Place where children not judged for white skin or Apache ways." The implications of his words settled over Sarah like a physical weight. "You're suggesting we live apart from everyone, in isolation?" "At first, yes. Later, when soldiers forget, when Dawson's men think you dead," he shrugged. "Then choose. Return to white settlement, return to tribe, or stay in canyon." Sarah considered this. A life removed from both societies meant surrendering much: education for the children, community support, the familiar rhythms of the world she'd known. Yet it also offered freedom from prejudice, from the constant negotiation of belonging that had already exhausted her in their brief time with the Apache. "And you?" she asked, the question emerging more softly than intended. "Would you stay with us in this canyon?" Swift Arrow's dark eyes met hers, unwavering in their directness. "If you permit." Such simple words, yet they contained volumes. "If you permit." Not a demand, not an assumption, an acknowledgement of her agency, her right to choose. In that moment, Sarah realized how rare such respect had been in her life. Even John, for all his kindness, had made decisions with the unquestioned authority of a husband in a world built by and for men. Before she could respond, Thomas called from deeper in the cave, his voice echoing with excitement. "Ma! Swift Arrow!" "Come see what we found." They followed the sound to a secondary chamber where the children stood before a wall covered in ancient paintings, human figures hunting deer, spiral symbols, handprints pressed against stone centuries ago. "Old ones left their stories," Swift Arrow said, reverence evident in his voice. "Many generations passed." Emma reached out tentatively, her small fingers hovering just above a handprint that seemed sized for a child not much older than herself. "Who were they?" "Ancestors," Swift Arrow replied. "Not Apache, not white. People of the land before both. Sarah studied the figures, ochre and black against the pale stone, messages from a past so distant it humbled her. "They're beautiful," she murmured. Swift Arrow nodded. "Would many sacred places have such paintings, signs that say, 'We were here, remember us'? Like Pa's gravestone," Thomas said with unexpected insight, "so people know he existed." "Yes," Swift Arrow agreed. "All people want to be remembered. Leave mark on world." A comfortable silence fell as they contemplated the ancient artwork. This tangible connection to human lives long vanished. Sarah felt a curious peace settle over her despite their precarious circumstances, a sense that their current struggles were but moments in a much longer story of survival, adaptation, and resilience. The children eventually succumbed to exhaustion, curling together on blankets spread over the soft sand that carpeted the cave floor. Sarah watched them sleep, their faces relaxed and trusting, even in this strange environment. "Do you raise them well?" Swift Arrow said quietly, settling beside her. "Strong spirits, open hearts." "Their father deserves much of the credit," Sarah replied. "John was a good man, patient, kind." Swift Arrow considered this. "You loved him deeply." It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. "Yes, we married young, grew together." She glanced at Swift Arrow, curiosity prompting her next words. "And your wife? What was she like?" Pain flickered across his features, but he didn't evade the question. "Morning light, beautiful, fierce." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, laughed at everything, even me. Sarah could picture this woman, strong enough to laugh at a warrior's dignity, brave enough to love in a world of constant danger. "And your son, little fox." "3 summers when soldiers came." Swift Arrow's voice remained steady, but his hands, usually so controlled, clenched involuntarily. "Smart boy, already learning bow." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, the words hopelessly inadequate against such loss. Swift Arrow was quiet for a time, his gaze fixed on some middle distance only he could see. When he spoke again, his voice was low but clear. "After they died, I want only revenge. Raid white settlements, kill soldiers, fill emptiness with blood." He looked at her directly. "I track Army Patrol 4 days, ready to die, taking many with me." "What stopped you?" "Found them camped near stream, about to attack when white officer's child wander away from camp." Swift Arrow's expression softened at the memory. "Little girl, maybe Emma's age. Playing with butterfly, not knowing danger?" Sarah could imagine the scene with painful clarity. A child's innocence juxtaposed against imminent violence. "I watch her," Swift Arrow continued. "Think of little fox. Think of what Morning Light would say about killing child's father." He shook his head slowly. "Could not do it. Left without attack." "That was mercy," Sarah said gently. "Humanity." "Was weakness," I thought then. "Returned to tribe in shame." His eyes found hers again. "Now I think maybe was first step on different path. Path that lead to your farm. To now." The implication hung between them, that perhaps their meeting wasn't merely chance, but the culmination of choices made long before currents that had gradually drawn them toward each other, despite the vast differences in their lives. Sarah was acutely aware of his proximity, of the quiet intimacy of their conversation, in the soft, filtered light of the cave, with their children sleeping peacefully nearby. It seemed they existed in a space removed from the conflicts of the world outside, a sanctuary where new possibilities could take root. "The canyon you mentioned," she said after a moment. "Have you been there before?" Swift Arrow nodded. "Many times. Good hunting." hidden from main trails. And you think we could truly make a life there, the 5 of us?" The question encompassed far more than practical concerns about shelter and sustenance. "If you wish it," he answered simply. Again, that careful acknowledgement of her choice, her will. Sarah studied him, this man who had saved them not once but repeatedly, who had risked his standing with his tribe to protect strangers, who spoke to her children with respect and kindness. "I think," she said slowly, each word considered, "that I would like to see this canyon." Something shifted in Swift Arrow's expression, a lightening, a cautious hope. "Then we go when darkness falls," he said. "It begin new journey." As if in response to his words, Emma stirred in her sleep, turning toward the sound of their voices before settling again. Sarah watched her daughter's peaceful face, then looked back at Swift Arrow, who was regarding the children with unmistakable tenderness. In that moment, Sarah allowed herself to envision a future she had never anticipated, one where this unlikely family forged their own path, neither fully of one world nor the other, but uniquely, defiantly their own. The journey to Swift Arrow's canyon took them through landscapes so varied and beautiful that Sarah found herself breathless, not just from exertion, but from wonder. They traveled primarily at night, Swift Arrow leading them through terrain that seemed impassable in the darkness, yet somehow yielded to his confident guidance. By day, they rested in sheltered places, a cave similar to the first, a dense thicket of mesquite trees, the shadow of a massive boulder perched improbably atop a hill. On the second night, they crossed a high plateau swept by winds that carried the scent of distant rain. Stars crowded the sky in such profusion that the darkness itself seemed merely a backdrop for their brilliance. Emma, riding double with Sarah, tilted her head back in awe. "There are so many," she whispered, "more than at home." "Same stars," Swift Arrow said, his voice carrying on the night breeze. "Just see them better here." No trees blocked view. Thomas, who had been riding alongside Swift Arrow with increasing confidence, asked, "Do they have names? The stars?" Swift Arrow nodded, pointing to various configurations. "That one hunter, that one bear." He traced a pattern Sarah recognized as the Big Dipper. White men called different names, but stars same. "Pa showed me the North Star once," Thomas said. "Said if I was ever lost, it would guide me home." Swift Arrow glanced at the boy, something like approval warming his usually stoic expression. "Your father teach good lessons. Stars never change path, always faithful." Sarah, listening to this exchange, found herself moved by Swift Arrow's easy acknowledgement of John's place in the children's lives. There was no jealousy, no attempt to diminish what had come before, only respect for the foundation upon which he might now build. By the third day, the landscape began to change dramatically. The broad, arid plains gave way to increasingly varied terrain, rocky outcroppings, sudden drops into dry washes, unexpected pockets of greenery where water lay hidden beneath the surface. Swift Arrow grew noticeably more alert, frequently dismounting to check for signs Sarah couldn't discern. "Are we getting close?" she asked as he returned from scouting ahead, his expression thoughtful. "Yes, but must be careful now." He gestured toward distant smudges of smoke rising against the horizon. "Miners camp there. Sometimes they hunt these hills." Sarah felt a chill at this reminder of the world they were trying to leave behind. "But are they dangerous? To Apache?" "Always." Swift Arrow's mouth set in a grim line. "To white woman, white children? Maybe not. But questions come, word spreads." She understood his concern. Even if miners didn't present an immediate threat to her and the children, Their presence complicated the fragile safety Swift Arrow was trying to create. Curious men asking questions, stories of a white woman living with an Apache warrior spreading from camp to camp. Such things could eventually reach Fort Morgan, or worse, Jack Dawson and his men. They adjusted their route, taking a longer path that kept them well away from the distant camp. The terrain grew steadily more challenging, steep slopes that required them to dismount and lead the horses, narrow passes where they proceeded single file with Swift Arrow ranging ahead to ensure the way was clear. Emma, who had maintained remarkable resilience throughout their journey, finally began to flag as the day wore on. The combination of physical exertion, interrupted sleep, and constant vigilance had taken its toll on her small body. "Are we almost there?" she asked repeatedly, her voice growing weaker with each inquiry. Swift Arrow, who had been scouting the path ahead, returned to find Emma nearly asleep in the saddle, Sarah's arm around her waist, the only thing keeping her upright. Without a word, he lifted the child and cradled her against his chest. "Close now," he said softly. Very close. He carried Emma as they continued, the girl's head nestled trustingly against his shoulder. Thomas walked beside them, occasionally reaching up to touch his sister's hand, his young face etched with concern. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they crested a ridge, and Swift Arrow halted, a rare smile breaking across his face. "Look," he said simply, gesturing toward the vista that had opened before them. Sarah stepped forward, a gasp escaping her lips as she took in the scene. Below them lay a hidden canyon, its walls rising in striated layers of red and gold stone. A stream cut through its center, fed by a waterfall that tumbled from the far cliffs. Along the watercourse, cottonwood and willow trees created a ribbon of green life, while natural terraces rose on either side, some appearing to have been cultivated in seasons past. "Oh, it's beautiful," she breathed, the simple words wholly inadequate to express the emotion that welled within her. Emma stirred in Swift Arrow's arms, blinking drowsily at the landscape. "Is that it? Is that our new home?" "Yes, little one," Swift Arrow answered, his voice gentler than Sarah had ever heard it. Home. The descent into the canyon required careful navigation, but Swift Arrow knew the path well, leading them along a series of switchbacks that eventually brought them to the canyon floor. As they approached the stream, Sarah noticed signs of previous habitation, a fire ring, several cutting tools of stone and bone, a rudimentary shelter constructed against the canyon wall. "You've lived here before," she observed. Swift Arrow nodded, setting Emma carefully on her feet near the stream bank. After morning light died, came here many seasons, place to heal. The admission struck Sarah deeply. This wasn't simply a convenient hiding place, it was Swift Arrow's sanctuary, a personal refuge he was now offering to share with them. "Thank you," she said softly, "for bringing us to your special place." His eyes met hers, and in them she saw understanding of grief, of healing, of the slow process of building a new life from the ashes of the old. "Now our place," he replied. The children, revived by the sight of their journey's end, explored the canyon with growing excitement. Thomas discovered a natural pool formed by the stream, perfect for swimming in warmer weather. Emma found a flat rock warmed by the sun, declaring it just right for a doll's tea party, before promptly curling up on it like a cat, the leather rabbit clutched to her chest. Swift Arrow showed Sarah the areas he had previously cultivated, terraces where beans and squash had grown, wild fruit trees he had tended, herbs that flourished in the sheltered microclimate of the canyon. It was a place of surprising abundance, hidden within the seemingly barren landscape they had traversed. "We can build there," he said, indicating a flat area near the stream but elevated enough to be safe from any seasonal flooding. Good view of canyon entrance. Protected from wind. Sarah tried to envision it, a home rising from this empty space, a life taking root in this hidden valley. It seemed both impossible and inevitable, like the desert plants that somehow thrived in the harshest conditions. "It will take time," she said, thinking aloud. "Shelter first, then more permanent structures, gardens, maybe corrals for the horses." Swift Arrow watched her with quiet approval as she catalogued what needed to be done, his expression softening when she unconsciously included him in every future plan. "Did we start tomorrow?" he said simply. "Tonight, rest." They made camp near the existing fire ring, Swift Arrow deeming it safe to have a small flame now that they had reached their destination. The warmth and light lifted everyone's spirits, creating a sense of homecoming despite the wilderness surrounding them. As darkness settled over the canyon and the children drifted to sleep, exhausted from their journey, Sarah found herself sitting beside Swift Arrow at the fire's edge, the crackling flames casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across their faces. "I keep thinking about what you said at the cave," she said after a comfortable silence, "about leaving a mark on the world, being remembered." Swift Arrow nodded, waiting for her to continue. "John and I came west because we wanted to build something that would last, a homestead that might grow into a proper farm, maybe even a small ranch someday, something we could pass on to Thomas and Emma." She gazed into the fire, memories playing across her mind. "I wonder sometimes if that dream died with him." "Dreams not die so easy," Swift Arrow replied thoughtfully. "Change shape, maybe. Find new path. Like river when rock falls, water still flows, finds different way." Sarah considered this, finding truth in the simple metaphor. "And what about your dreams? Before everything?" He was quiet for a long moment, his profile strong against the darkness beyond the firelight. "Wanted to be great warrior," he finally said. "Protect tribe, hunt well, have many children." A shadow crossed his face. "Simple dreams. Perhaps the simplest dreams are the most profound," Sarah suggested gently. "Protection, provision, family, the foundations of any good life." Swift Arrow's gaze shifted to the sleeping children, lingering on their peaceful faces with an expression that made Sarah's heart constrict. "Still want these things," he admitted quietly. The vulnerability in his voice, the careful way he expressed desires that might be denied him, moved Sarah deeply. Without conscious thought, she reached out, her hand finding his in the space between them. "I want them too," she whispered. His fingers closed around hers, strong and certain, and they sat in silence as the fire burned lower, each lost in thoughts of what might be possible in this hidden canyon, this new beginning. The peaceful moment shattered at dawn. Swift Arrow woke them with urgent whispers, his body tense with alertness. "Riders coming, many horses." Sarah was instantly awake, fear clutching at her throat. "Soldiers?" He shook his head, already gathering their few belongings. "Not army, move different." His expression darkened. "Dawson's men, maybe. Or miners who saw our trail." Thomas helped Emma to her feet, the children moving with the quiet efficiency born of their recent experiences. No tears, no questions, just immediate, trusting compliance. "The horses?" Sarah asked, glancing toward where their mounts grazed near the stream. "No time," Swift Arrow replied grimly. "Hide first." "There." He pointed toward a narrow fissure in the canyon wall, nearly invisible unless one knew exactly where to look. They slipped into the crevice, which widened immediately into a small chamber within the rock face. Swift Arrow positioned himself at the entrance, bow ready, knife at his belt. "Stay back," he instructed, his voice barely audible. No sound. Through the narrow opening, Sarah could see a sliver of the canyon floor, enough to watch as 7 riders entered their sanctuary, moving with the confidence of men who believed themselves unopposed. Her blood ran cold as she recognized Jack Dawson at their head, his face twisted in a triumphant smile as he surveyed the abandoned campsite. "Well, boys," his voice carried clearly in the morning stillness, "looks like our little widow didn't get far after all." Sarah pressed a hand over Emma's mouth, feeling her daughter's rapid breath against her palm. Thomas stood rigid beside them, his young face set with determination beyond his years. From their hiding place, they watched as Dawson dismounted, circling the remains of their fire with predatory satisfaction. "And it's still warm," he announced to his men. "They can't have gone far." He kicked at the ashes, sending sparks spiraling into the morning air. "Fan out! Check the stream edge for tracks." Swift Arrow's body was a study in controlled tension, every muscle coiled and ready. He held his bow at half-draw, an arrow nocked but not yet raised. His eyes, when they briefly met Sarah's, held a silent message: be ready to run, but run where? The canyon that had seemed so spacious moments before now felt like a trap. The only exit was the way they had entered, and Dawson's men blocked that path completely. "Mr. Dawson," one of the men called, examining the ground near their abandoned bedrolls. "Looks like the Apache's still with them. Got his tracks here." Dawson spat into the dust. "Figured as much. Savage probably thinks he's gonna make her his squaw." He laughed, an ugly sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "We'll see about that." Rage flashed across Swift Arrow's face, quickly mastered and channeled into deadly focus. He shifted slightly, angling for a clearer shot should it become necessary. Sarah's mind raced. There were 7 of them, all armed. Swift Arrow might take down 1 or 2 with his bow, but the others would cut him down in an instant, and then her children would be at Dawson's mercy or lack thereof. "Looky here!" Another of Dawson's men had discovered their horses grazing near the cottonwoods. "Got their mounts? They're on foot for sure," Dawson grinned, the expression transforming his face into something barely human. "Good. That'll make this easier." He drew his revolver, checking the chambers with practiced ease. "Remember, boys, I want the woman alive. Do what you want with the savage, but Sarah Colton's mine." The casual malevolence in his voice sent ice through Sarah's veins. This man had tracked them across miles of wilderness, not for the homestead he'd originally coveted, but for her, for the twisted satisfaction of breaking her will, possessing what had been denied him. One of the men, younger than the others and visibly uncomfortable, spoke up hesitantly. "What about the kids, boss?" Dawson's expression hardened. "What about Em? They've been living with an Apache, probably turned savage themselves by now." "You feeling squeamish, Jenkins?" The younger man swallowed visibly, but didn't back down. "Just seems wrong is all. They're just children." "Then you stay with the horses," Dawson snapped. "The rest of you, spread out. They're here somewhere, and I aim to find them before sundown." As the men began to move through the canyon, methodically searching every possible hiding place, Swift Arrow turned to Sarah. His whisper was barely audible, his lips close to her ear. "When I move, you run upstream, find waterfall. Path behind leads to high ground." Sarah shook her head frantically. "They'll kill you," she mouthed. Swift Arrow's expression didn't change, but his eyes held hers with fierce intensity. "Children need mother. Go. I find you, Before she could protest further, swift arrow slipped from their hiding place, like a shadow detaching from darkness. He moved with such fluid silence that even Sarah, watching him go, could barely track his progress as he worked his way toward the far side of the canyon. "Stay here," she whispered to the children. "Don't move until I call you." Thomas gripped his sister's hand, nodding his understanding. Emma's eyes were wide with fear, but she made no sound, the gravity of their situation evident even to her young mind. Sarah eased toward the crevice entrance, watching as Swift Arrow positioned himself behind a large boulder near the canyon wall. His strategy became clear as he nocked an arrow and let it fly toward the far side of the canyon, where it struck a dead tree with a distinctive thwack. "Over there!" one of Dawson's men shouted, and immediately 3 of them converged on the sound, moving away from the hiding place where the children waited. Swift Arrow fired again, this time sending an arrow into the ground near the horses. The animals, already nervous from the tension in the air, startled and pulled at their tethers. The youngest man, Jenkins, struggled to control them as another arrow landed nearby. "Someone's shooting at us," he called, ducking for cover. Dawson whirled, his gun raised. "Where?" Swift Arrow's next arrow answered the question, striking the ground at Dawson's feet with deliberate precision, a warning, not a miss. "Apache!" one of the men shouted, firing wildly in the direction the arrow had come from. Chaos erupted as the horses broke free from Jenkins's control, stampeding through the camp and scattering Dawson's men. Swift Arrow used the confusion to move again, firing arrows from a new position, keeping the men disoriented and divided. Sarah recognized her chance. Ducking back into the crevice, she grabbed the children's hands. "Now," she whispered urgently, "run for the stream, don't look back." They emerged into the morning light, immediately sprinting toward the water as Swift Arrow had instructed. Sarah could hear Dawson shouting orders, the crack of gunfire, but she didn't turn, focusing only on the path ahead and the small hands clasped in hers. They had nearly reached the stream when a shout went up behind them. "There they are!" A bullet whined past Sarah's head, striking a rock near the water's edge. Emma screamed and Thomas stumbled, nearly falling before Sarah yanked him forward with desperate strength. They splashed into the stream, the cold water shocking against their legs as they waded toward the far bank. The waterfall Swift Arrow had mentioned loomed ahead, its roar nearly drowning out the sounds of pursuit. Behind them, Swift Arrow burst from cover, placing himself directly between Dawson's men and the fleeing family. He loosed arrows in rapid succession, forcing the pursuers to dive for cover. "Keep going," Sarah urged the children, half dragging them through the deepening water. "The waterfall, look for the path." Thomas spotted it first, a narrow ledge running behind the cascading water, nearly invisible unless you knew to look for it. "There, Ma!" They scrambled onto the ledge, the spray from the falls drenching them instantly. The path was treacherous, slippery with moss, and barely wide enough for single-file passage. Sarah pushed the children ahead of her, shielding them with her body as they inched along the precipitous route. From this vantage point, she could see the entire canyon floor, including Swift Arrow, who stood alone against 5 armed men. Dawson had taken cover behind a boulder, but was working his way closer, vengeance etched in every line of his face. "Swift Arrow!" she screamed, her voice lost in the thunder of the falls. As if he'd heard her anyway, Swift Arrow glanced up, locating them on the ledge. Relief flashed across his face, quickly replaced by grim determination as he turned back to face Dawson's men. His quiver was nearly empty, Sarah realized with mounting horror. 2, perhaps 3 arrows remained, while Dawson and his men still had firearms and ammunition. "We have to help him," Thomas said, his voice thick with tears. "We can't leave him, Ma." "We're not leaving him," Sarah answered, though she had no idea how they could possibly aid Swift Arrow from their position. The ledge continued upward, eventually reaching the top of the canyon wall, safety, but at the cost of abandoning the man who had sacrificed everything for them. A gunshot echoed through the canyon, followed by a cry of pain. Sarah's heart stopped as she saw Swift Arrow stagger, clutching his side where a dark stain spread rapidly across his buckskin shirt. "No!" The scream tore from her throat, unbidden, raw with desperation. Swift Arrow straightened with visible effort, knocking another arrow despite his injury. He fired, catching one of Dawson's men in the shoulder, then ducked behind a tree as return fire splintered the bark around him. Sarah made a decision in that moment, one born not of calculation, but of the bone-deep certainty that some things were worth any risk. "Thomas," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her, "take your sister and keep going. Follow the path to the top. Hide in the rocks there." "What are you going to do?" Thomas asked, though his eyes said he already knew. Sarah slipped John's hunting knife from the sheath at her belt, the same knife Swift Arrow had returned to her days ago. "I'm going to help him." Before Thomas could protest, she pressed a quick kiss to both children's foreheads. "Go. Now. We'll come for you when it's safe." With one last look at her children's faces, Sarah turned and began moving back down the ledge, toward the canyon floor, toward Swift Arrow, toward whatever fate awaited them both. The descent was perilous, the rocks slick with spray, but fear for Swift Arrow drove her forward with reckless speed. She was halfway down when another volley of gunfire erupted below, followed by an eerie silence. Sarah froze, straining to see through the mist. Swift Arrow was down, one knee in the dirt, his last arrow knocked but his strength clearly failing. Dawson approached slowly, revolver aimed at the wounded warrior's heart. "Where is she?" Dawson demanded, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "Where's the woman?" Swift Arrow's response, though too low to hear, must have been defiant, for Dawson's face contorted with rage. He raised his gun, preparing to fire at point-blank range. "Dawson!" Sarah's shout echoed off the canyon walls. She stood at the base of the falls now, knife in hand, hair streaming wet around her shoulders, eyes blazing with a fury to match the man who had hunted them so relentlessly. Dawson turned, momentary surprise giving way to triumphant pleasure. Well, well. The widow Colton come to surrender at last. "Let him go," Sarah said, her voice steady, despite the terror clawing at her chest. "It's me you want." "That it is," Dawson agreed, his smile chilling in its calculation. "But I think I'll kill your Apache friend first, so you understand your situation properly." He swung the gun back toward Swift Arrow, who had used the distraction to rise to his feet, swaying but defiant. What happened next occurred so swiftly that Sarah would later struggle to piece together the sequence of events. A war cry rang out from the canyon entrance, pure, primal, and unmistakably Apache. Dawson whirled, his gun discharging harmlessly into the ground as a mounted warrior charged into the canyon, followed by another Sioux and another. The Apache scouts who had found them days ago had returned, and they were not alone. Behind them rode Chief Many Horses himself, his aged frame straight and proud atop his pinto stallion, eagle feathers adorning his silver braids. Beside him, to Sarah's astonishment, rode Singing Dove, her face painted for battle, a rifle balanced expertly across her saddle. Dawson's remaining men scattered in panic, firing wildly as they ran for the canyon entrance. 2 fell beneath Apache arrows before they'd gone 10 paces. Jenkins, the youngest, threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. Dawson himself stood frozen in disbelief. His advantage evaporated in seconds. With a snarl of desperate rage, he turned his gun on Sarah, only to find Swift Arrow's final arrow buried in his chest. The outlaw staggered, shock replacing fury as he looked down at the shaft protruding from his body. His revolver slipped from nerveless fingers as he collapsed to his knees, then pitched forward into the dust of the canyon floor. Sarah ran to Swift Arrow, who had spent the last of his strength on that crucial shot. She caught him as he sagged, easing him gently to the ground, her hands immediately seeking the wound in his side. "The children," he gasped, his eyes searching her face with desperate concern. "Safe," she assured him, tearing strips from her petticoat to staunch the bleeding. "Up the path, as you said. They're safe because of you." Relief flooded his features, followed by a grimace of pain as she pressed against the wound. "Chief came," he said wonderingly. "Didn't think." "Save your strength," Sarah urged, looking up as shadows fell across them. Chief Many Horses dismounted with the assistance of two younger warriors, approaching with solemn dignity. He spoke in Apache, his voice grave but not unkind. Swift Arrow responded weakly, gesturing towards Sarah with a bloodied hand. Singing Dove appeared at her father's side, her expression inscrutable as she studied Sarah and Swift Arrow. "My cousin Morning Star had a vision," she said in her precise English. She saw Swift Arrow fall, defending the white woman and her children. She saw his blood watering the earth. Her eyes shifted to the wound Sarah was tending, but she did not see him die. Hope surged in Sarah's chest. "Can you help him?" Singing Dove hesitated, centuries of justified suspicion warring with something new in her eyes. A reluctant recognition, perhaps, of the courage it had taken for a white woman to stand against her own kind in defense of an Apache. "My father says Swift Arrow fulfilled his responsibility," she said finally. "He protected you and your children, as he promised the council. His honor is restored." She knelt beside them, examining the wound with experienced hands. "I will help him. If the bullet is not too deep, he may live." Sarah's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Thank you," she whispered. Then remembering, "My children, they're hidden above the falls." Chief Many Horses spoke, and immediately two young warriors set off toward the waterfall, moving with the same fluid grace that Sarah had come to associate with Swift Arrow. As Singing Dove worked to extract the bullet from Swift Arrow's side, Sarah held his hand, her thumb tracing gentle circles on his skin. His eyes never left her face, even as pain caused sweat to bead on his forehead. "And you came back," he murmured. "Could have run with children, been safe." "We belong together," Sarah replied simply. "All of us." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Family," he said, the word holding all the meaning they both understood but had not yet fully expressed. "Yes," she affirmed, bending to press her forehead against his in the gesture she had seen between the Apache who were closest to one another. Family. The warriors returned with Thomas and Emma, who broke free of their escorts and ran to their mother's side, eyes wide with fear at the sight of Swift Arrow's blood-soaked clothing. "Is he going to die?" Emma asked, her small voice trembling. "No, little one," Swift Arrow answered before Sarah could, his hand reaching out to touch the child's tear-streaked cheek. "Not today." Thomas knelt beside them, his young face solemn. "You saved us again," he said, "like you promised." Swift Arrow's gaze moved between the boy and Sarah. "Always keep promises," he said, "to family." As the sun climbed higher in the canyon sky, casting its golden light over the tableau of Apache warriors, white children, and the improbable bond forming between worlds long at war, Sarah thought she glimpsed the outline of a future none of them could have imagined mere days ago. It would not be easy. There would be challenges from both societies, prejudices to overcome, practical difficulties of living in this remote place. But looking at Swift Arrow, at her children, at the unexpected allies they had found in Chief Many Horses, and even the reluctantly respectful Singing Dove, Sarah felt a certainty settle in her heart. They would build their home here, in this hidden canyon where ancient paintings spoke of those who had come before. They would plant crops in the fertile soil, raise animals in the sheltered meadows, create a life that honored both their pasts while forging something entirely new. And someday, perhaps, others would find their way to this place, others who, like them, didn't quite fit in the rigidly defined worlds beyond the canyon walls. Others who sought peace, acceptance, the freedom to love across boundaries drawn by fear and history. Emma curled against Swift Arrow's uninjured side, her small hand patting his arm with instinctive gentleness. Thomas sat straight-backed and watchful, already showing signs of the man he would become under Swift Arrow's guidance. And Sarah, her heart fuller than she had believed possible after John's death, kept her hand firmly clasped with Swift Arrow's, a silent promise for all the days to come. In the weeks and months that followed, as Swift Arrow healed and their first dwellings rose beside the stream, as gardens took root and paths were worn between favorite spots in their new domain, Sarah often thought of what Swift Arrow had said that night by the fire. Dreams did not die easily. They changed shape, found new paths, like water flowing around obstacles. What had begun in loss, her widowhood, Swift Arrow's grief for his wife and son, had transformed into something neither of them could have foreseen. A family forged not by blood or convention, but by choice, by courage, by love that transcended the boundaries others had decreed impassable. And in the end, perhaps that was the most powerful legacy they could leave, proof that even in a world torn by prejudice and violence, it was possible to choose a different way, to build rather than destroy, to love rather than hate, to find, in the most unlikely circumstances, the very thing the heart most deeply needed: a home, a family, a future illuminated by hope.